Hey kids, thanks for joining me in the garage again. Today we're going to be performing a little maintenance under the 99 4Runner by greasing and rechecking the torque on the rear drive and front propeller shaft. Hit that thumbs up, leave a comment down below with any questions, and if you're here for the first time, consider subscribing. Let's do some wrenching. So as you can see, I've got the rear drive shaft and front propeller shaft out of the 4Runner and here on the bench. Getting these out of the vehicle is pretty straightforward, requiring only a couple of 14mm wrenches to remove the 4 bolts and nuts attaching it to the flanges on either end of them. I took these off the truck so I can show a little easier where the grease zerks are on each of these and discuss a little bit why removing the slip joints to grease them is a good idea. Before I do that, I'm going to get these cleaned up a little bit, and while I do that, here's a short little time lapse of me pulling these from under the truck. So as you can see, we're up under the truck here. We're going to be first, I got it strapped down here. You won't be able to see that, but we've got 14mm bolts here. First thing we want to do on this is actually make a mark here so we can put it back in the same spot that it started off here. That way, if there's any balancing issues or anything, we can get it put back so that those don't start up. I'm just gonna go ahead and we're gonna get this taken off here. So I've got my little gun here and then a 14mm ratchet, and so we'll get this going. Alright, as you can see here, I've got these all somewhat cleaned up. The slip joints cleaned up a little bit better. It's really hard to get a brush or any kind of stuff without having a parts washer. These are real hard to get kind of perfectly cleaned up. So as you can see, there are a total of 8 points that you need to grease. So this one in the double cardon joint's a little hard to see. but you've got two, one for the U-joint and one for the slip joint on both the slip joints for the front and rear shafts. And then on the double card-on joint, you've got one for the internal card-on, and then two, one for each of the U-joints in that joint. So, and then on the rear, this right here connects to the transfer case on the front, and so that has one for the U-joint as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to grease these U-joints, the double card-on joint, and then for the slip joints, I'm going to show you a little bit different ways. So got the grease gun here. I've got some super lithium EP moly grease that's in there. I'll show you. You can see here the factory service manual has two different types of grease that you'll that they recommend in the factory service manual. I just use this EP moly grease. It's the NLGI number 2 type grease. Works really good. I haven't found much of a negative, on using just that type of grease for all of these joints. So what we're going to do here, I've got the grease gun. What you can do on here, the way I've got this set up, you unscrew this a little bit, and then when you put it on these joints, you can screw it down, and that'll effectively lock it in there. So let's start greasing these. All right, so I had to pause there for a second because my grease gun had run out of grease. And so now I've got this all set up here so we can kind of see how this works. And so the grease gun, you kind of just unscrew that a little bit, and then you can then slip it on top of this Zerk. So we're going to do this double card on first. And what you're going to kind of see, hopefully be able to see this, is once you've got grease in there, it'll start coming out of these joints a little bit. And so we just put that on there and then screw it on. That'll lock onto that Zerk. And then we can give this a few pumps. So you can kind of hear it. I'll be quiet here and you can hear. And so you can kind of see the grease coming out of these joints here. So that's how we know that that's good to go. And so we'll undo this. This gets kind of messy at times. I want to have a rag handy. There we go. Do this other one here. Try to turn this so you can kind of see a little better as that grease comes out. So it's going to start coming out of these joints right there.
Let's get out of here.
All right, so that gets all these U-joints. So the next thing is going to be the slip joints, and I'll show you how we do those. I'm going to get this wiped down a little bit because I won't need the grease gun for that. All right, to do these slip joints, what we're going to do, I've got them all cleaned out here. And so the best way to do this, this might be hard to see. See if I can't get a little bit of a light here. So you can kind of see, it's not perfectly clean down there, but it's pretty good. And so the thing is, when you're greasing these while they're on the truck, what you're doing is essentially you're greasing it down here and pushing that bad grease onto the joint, because these just basically slip on here. And the problem is that all that bad grease really doesn't have anywhere to go, and it just stays in there essentially. It'll seep a little bit out of these joints, but you really want to kind of get them cleaned out of there. And so that's what I did. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to I have a little tube of moly grease here, and I'm just going to basically squeeze it down into these, and then we can then put those back on the truck. One of the things that I noticed is how, it was running a little rough earlier on the bends here. That's not too bad. That's not too bad. It's definitely some wear. So I know here in the next probably a few months, I'm going to need to replace the U-joints on these, but that's fine. Not too worried about it now. What I'm worried about now is just being able to get this all lubed up. So yeah, there's not a whole lot in here. I thought there was a little bit more in this little tube, but just go ahead, stick that down in there, get a finger down in there and get all those splines lubed up, because that's really the thing that you want, is to make sure all these splines are all lubed up down as far as you can get it. So and then while you're at it, now this is the rear prop shaft, but I'll go ahead and put that big daub down in there. Just put a little bit on there as well. And so now that I've got that in there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to take this Zerk off. That way it'll relieve some of the pressure that's in there when I put these together. So this is just a 7mm wrench here. And these will just, you know, these stay pretty well greased, so they should just pop right off like that. There we go. And this one I had marked, so basically this yellow mark here is where the Zerk was on it. So this will slide in much easier now. And so let's get some of this grease down in there. There we go. Got a little bit coming up out of the Zerk, so just wipe that off. Put that Zerk down in there and tighten that back up. Doesn't have to be super tight. But that way, that's a little easier to get on there. And now we're pretty much done. I'm going to go do that to the rear drive shaft, and then we'll go under the truck and get these back in. All right, so torquing these, there's really not a good way, like you can see, getting these, you know, you can't really, at least for this torque wrench, you can't really get in there. You end up risking, you know, stripping the bolt if you just have a single socket on there. And so you're going to want to actually add a extension on there. So what I've got is a short 3-inch extension on my long socket that I put on the torque wrench. Now I know, you know, these are torqued to 54 foot-pounds, and putting this extension on there does reduce the torque that you're putting on those. So, you know, we might give it another 1/8 inch, or well, excuse me, 1/16 of a turn, 1/8 of a turn, something along that line, in order to make sure it's actually torqued to 54 foot-pounds. So, I'm gonna, sometimes you'll need to get a wrench on there as well. I got these long wrenches I can come in from the side here. There we go. And then just crank away till it clicks. And like I said, once it clicks, give it another little torque to really make sure you're putting the 54 foot-pounds on it. So, you know, you've got the 4 bolts here, the 4 bolts at the transfer case, and then of course the 4 bolts on the rear of the transfer case and the rear of the differential. We won't go through that. I think that pretty much covers getting everything greased. I know, you know, getting these torqued as well is a good idea. You want to do that pretty much every other oil change on here. And so that covers it. So I really hope you learned something today. If you like what you saw, hit that thumbs up. If you're here for the first time, consider subscribing. You can always follow me on Instagram at Weekend Wrench Turner. Thanks for watching. Keep on wrenching.